I have had so many conversations behind the scenes with my clients about their identities and more so outdated identities showing up in their life now. I figured if I'm having those conversations with that many of my clients, then this is likely to be something that is relevant for you as well, which is what I'm here for. Whether you are looking at who you are now or who you want to be, if you are still living and showing up as the old version of yourself, letting the old identities that you have carried come through it, through, can't talk today, then you're fucking yourself up, right? You need an upgrade. And I joke when I say you're fucking yourself up. And also, you are creating so much more friction, tension, and challenges for yourself if you haven't taken any time to look at what identity your is ruling and you're functioning from and how you're operating. Let me break this down so you know what I'm talking about. When we go through life, throughout our lives, you will have had different identities. You will have had different traits and characteristics that have created your identity. And throughout your life, there will be some traits, characteristics, identities that have remained constant from when you were little to where you are now. And you will have some that just no longer serve you. They aren't aligned and they just aren't who you are anymore. When you're younger, often, not always, we have an identity, like we have our child's identity, right? Who are you? What are the traits and characteristics you have? How do you view life? How do you show up in life? And again, depending on what your upbringing was like, is going to determine and play a big part in that identity. My identity as a child was, everything was great. Life was great and we had lots of fun. And, it was really quite innocent when I think about it. Then, when you've experienced trauma, or when you do experience trauma, your identity changes. The traits and characteristics that you have previously walked with change. You go into survival, you go into safety, you go into walls up, and the identity that you carry will be different. So then it's a matter of looking at, well, who and how did you show up? How did you view life when you experienced trauma? What did you do to keep yourself safe or maybe overcompensate or hide what had happened? Then when we start our healing, we create another identity. Right? Who are we beyond this? Who are we now that our trauma doesn't define us? How do we show up? And then when we move beyond our primary healing and start focusing on thriving and really bringing together a life that we love so much, again, your identity changes. The traits and characteristics that create and make up who you are different to every other stage along the way. And there could be 5 other seasons of life in there as well. I just wanted to use those 4 because they're quite obvious and dominant, and they are moments in time that will have an impact on your identity. If you're a mum, you could add in the motherhood. There's so many different seasons, right? So only you know the seasons that you've lived and the identities that you've carried. Now, what I'm talking about when I say we have and living from outdated identities, if you think about, if you're in a place of life where things are really good, you feel really good within yourself, you're doing things that you love, you're starting to focus on your future, that feels good, right? Yes, you are still going to have fear. The limiting beliefs are still going to be there. You're still going to, you're still going to human, right? Life is still going to life and you're still a human. But if you're at this point where you're like, yes, I'm ready to do this, whether it is I'm ready to bring my vision to life, whether it is studying, whether it's a creative thing, whether it's a business, whether it's a relationship, whether it's leaving a relationship, whether it's finding more peace and groundedness, whatever it is. If you're like, I'm ready to do this, but you're living from a place of an old identity that fears anything unknown, that wants to be in control of everything, that hides who they truly are, that fits in, that is a people pleaser, that is a good girl, you're going to find it really hard to move forward because your heart and your soul is like, yes, let's do this. This is what I want. And then your head is like, oh no, wait, that's overwhelming. That makes me nervous. I'm scared about that. We don't do that. Right. And so you've got this internal tug of war happening because your identities are misaligned. And when your identities are misaligned, you start to question who you are. You question the decisions that you're making. You probably sabotage your life in ways that you may not know. And that would often look like, being in a place that feels really good, feels really abundant, but then almost questioning that because that's not the way that you used to view things. Similarly, you might notice it, and it kind of follows on from last week's episode, where you may have previously really enjoyed conversations with certain people, and now you're in this conversation, you're like, this isn't what I want to be doing. This doesn't feel good for me, right? So when your identities are misaligned, or when your identities are outdated, more so, everything internally and everything that you're doing is going to feel misaligned. And you can't move forward and embrace this version of you if you don't know what your identity is. And you can't do it, especially if you are functioning from an old identity. It just doesn't work, right? So there are some things, some questions for you to work through. And one, there's three parts that I'm going to talk to. One is, it's I want to say basic. It's not basic, but it's very structured, right? So on a piece of paper, I would say get a big piece of paper. You draw 4 columns. The first is who am I now? The second is what identity am I living through? The third is where is the misalignment? And the fourth is what needs to change. Right. So you're sitting there being like, okay, this is who I am. This is what I want. This is everything that I'm focusing on. How are you viewing that? And if you're going to do this, you have to be really honest with yourself. You have to have the self awareness that allows you to do this work, right? And especially to see the misalignment because you can't, right? You're not going to see the misalignment if you don't have the self awareness and you're not being honest with yourself. So I want to give you an example from one of my clients where she has decided to study and she's going back to do some study and she's like, this is so good. I'm so excited about this. This is really going to help me like create the life that I want for myself. And we were all excited. We spoke about it. We spoke about the pros and cons and everything else. And she's like, yeah, cool. And then when it started, she could see that there was this old pattern of overwhelm and fear and avoidance coming in. And we were talking about it. She's like, I just don't know why. Like, I was really excited about this. And I'm just, you know, not doing what I want to do and not doing what I know I need to do. And we had this conversation around identities. And it was that she hadn't updated her identity. She hadn't aligned and connected with who she is now. That story that she had, or that person that was playing out in being like, oh, I'm just going to avoid this or not start this or procrastinate, that's an old version of her that was overwhelmed, overstressed, burnt out, and not sure of who she is. And so I gave her this specific task, right? This specific task, the 4 columns, the 4 questions to sit down and do it. She was like, you know what? You're right. Even just you telling me, or not telling you, but even you asking me the question of my identity, I know that how I'm showing up is not who I am. This is a past version of me coming out and like trying to take over. And again, that can be really normal, right? If we think about when we create change, if you think about how long you've lived a certain way and then you create change, often the change is for a much shorter time, right? And so then we wonder and question ourselves and, almost put ourselves down when we revert to old patterns. And it's not a bad thing, right? It's just that it hasn't become habit yet. It hasn't become like you haven't solidified yourself in that identity. And that's what this will do because it brings to light where the gaps are, what needs to change, what you need to focus on, and it gives you an anchor point, right? So, with the example that I gave, for my client, she's like, I want to do this because I know that what's misaligned is I'm not doing the work. I'm not showing up for myself. I'm worried about everything external to me. So, that gave her the anchor. I know that if I do this course, this creates a pathway for the life that I want. It's very clear, it's very obvious, and it's actually really quite powerful. It's really, really powerful. And there are two other questions that I'm going to leave you with. One of them is similar and kind of flows into what we've just done. So the four columns. And that is what is the gap between who I am, who I want to be, and how I'm showing up? Right? So, what is the gap? And so, there's three in that: who you are now, who you want to be, and how you're showing up. The last question: what am I pretending not to know? What am I pretending not to know?